Maybe you haven't heard anything about this. So let me give you the cliff notes on this. Cliff notes is Rachel Nichols during last year's NBA bubble. She was in her hotel room as people were doing a lot of stuff remotely, like we are doing this podcast. And the conversation she had apparently was recorded, in which she said some comments, a rant about diversity with with Maria Taylor. Maria Taylor, who was going to get the opportunity at the time to host NBA Countdown during the finals. Apparently, according to Rachel Nichols, that had been promised to her. And this happens a lot of times. Promises are made in contracts to people who are on air. And Nichols was unhappy about that. She discussed her frustration of not being chosen for the position with Adam Mendelson, longtime advisor of Lakers star LeBron James. So during the call, Nichols expressed her opinion. Taylor got the assignment because the network was feeling pressure to improve its record on racial issues. Now, folks, you got to remember, this is last summer during the NBA bubble, also during the protests that took in the street by many people in this country, particularly of color, for the murders of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and the countless other Black and brown bodies that have been murdered at the hands of the police, and they have gotten away with it, for the most part. This is what Nichols said. I wish Maria Taylor all the success in the world. She covers football. She covers basketball. This was in the audio excerpt that was published by The Times. If you need to give her more things to do because you're feeling pressure about your crappy long-time record in diversity, which, by the way, I know personally from the female side of it, like, go for it. Just find somewhere else. You're not going to find it from me or taking my thing away, right? And the problem with this, and Brian, I'm going to try to get into this as best as I can. The problem with, and you could, folks, I encourage you to read the Times article yourself to get the full context and scope. Everything. New York Times, who did excellent reporting on this and took the time to actually do the reporting, which is what you're supposed to do in terms of journalism. Take the time and do the reporting. The problem I'm going to speak on for this that was bothersome to me from what I read from Nichols was the fact that she spoke, and you heard from that quote, that she said she understands the crappy diversity policies that might go on at ESPN, or it could be any company. I've seen this too, working as an on-air journalist. There are a lot of companies with crappy diversity policies. I've said this before in the show. Companies, no matter where you work and what you can do, they can say they care about Black people, but they don't. And you should know, as a woman, women have their own struggles, no matter what their race and background is, in terms of getting opportunities. But what's interesting about Nichols' comments and venting her frustration, as she said, is as soon as she thought an opportunity was being taken away from her, and for those not watching, I'm putting air quotes around that, she then made it about race, or at least alleged that Maria Taylor only got this because she was the Black woman to get this opportunity at the moment. And so where this controversy comes out, folks, is that someone on ESPN recorded the video, showed it to Maria Taylor, also leaked it to a bunch of different outlets. And this is where we get the reporting from the New York Times about it. So there's all this controversy about it. There are plenty of people who are mad at what Rachel Nichols says. And as a Black person and somebody who works in sports journalism, I understand that. At the same time, NABJ is now calling for a meeting with ESPN. I'll get to my thoughts on that later. And those meetings that come about all the time when stuff like this happens, and I really don't think anything really comes of it. I think it's kind of bullshit. Brian, I see you smiling.
Like players only meetings.
It's like, I'll get to that. I want to save that point for later. But for me, as a Black person, as a journalist, was disappointing about Rachel Nichols' comments. And I want to be clear about this. There have been people saying Rachel Nichols is racist. And there's been people defending Rachel Nichols, saying Rachel Nichols is an ally. Here's the thing. I don't think Rachel Nichols is racist. Right, number one. I don't think Rachel Nichols is racist. And I do believe Rachel Nichols could have spent a good amount of her life and time being an ally for Black people, particularly in the media industry. But I do think it's interesting. We have to look at when something happened that she didn't felt benefited her, she chose whiteness, right? Like, she leaned into the whiteness. It was like, this Black woman potentially got this because she's Black. and only fit in this. No way it could be Maria Taylor got it because of her talent or whatever else may be going on. And again, I want to be clear on this too. We speak about we spoke many times in this podcast, Brian and I, that people covering different leagues, it should be representative of the people that they're covering. So if ESPN wanted and decided to have Maria Taylor, because she's a Black woman, be the face on NBA Countdown, that's fine. Makes sense to me. We don't really complain about I don't see any Black people hosting any hockey shows. And it makes sense because ain't that much Black people playing hockey. I get that. That's okay and that's fine. But I think the insinuation and what's hurtful to some Black people is that this is the only reason that she could have gotten the job. That came out in her frustrated comments, and that's bothersome to a lot of people because as Black folks and brown folks, we getting opportunities, we always have to hear this. And people are tired of hearing that. And that's why it's upsetting. Maybe that wasn't Rachel Nichols' intent. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But I think we can say the comments are problematic and how she sort of defaulted to race. And then what's also bothersome that I don't think should be left out of the story, Brian, I'll let you speak in 1 second, is that the man she was speaking to, and I'm sorry, his name is escaping me right now. His name was LeBron James's advisor.
Was it Adam Mendelsohn?
Mendelsohn, sorry, Mr. Mendelsohn.
Yeah.
He made some comments about how things may have gone too far with the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter. And, that was an opportunity if Nichols felt differently to shut him down. And she didn't shut him down. Okay. She laughed at that comment. And it was like, one, as a woman, that was disturbing that she laughed at the comment regarding Me Too. And if you are really an ally for Black people, there's nothing funny about the Black Lives Movement has gone too far. In fact, I would say neither of those movements have gone far enough because we still have toxic masculinity and we damn sure still have racism. So I don't consider it a laughing matter at all whatsoever. And that was really disappointing. She had an opportunity to actually truly be an ally there and she dropped the ball. And Rachel Nichols, that's something she has to deal with. But she has to acknowledge her privilege in this to even complain about opportunity. Let's also be clear on something. Rachel Nichols is the daughter-in-law of Diane Sawyer. You can't tell me that didn't help her in some way. I'm not saying it's the only thing. I think Rachel Nichols is a fine reporter, but you can't tell me that didn't help her at all knowing that. So let's not act like people are just getting opportunities for certain things when you may not have gotten as far as you've gotten in your career. If somebody didn't like you for whatever reason, might have liked your mother-in-law, whatever reason that may be, there's a whole host of reasons that people get hired sometimes or don't get hired sometimes. So she didn't check her privilege. And I think that's the problem for me here.
Oh, there's so many layers to this. I mean, honestly, somebody can legitimately, I'll throw this idea out there in case somebody wants to do it. Hopefully not, but somebody could legitimately do a 7-part podcast series on this entire thing because there are so many layers to this and you could just pick one and do an episode on it. The thing that I come back to as I keep thinking about this days later is just the culture of ESPN and what I've heard Jamel Hill discuss, what I've heard Dan Le Batard discuss, what I've heard Amin El Hassan discuss, and all three of them actually discuss this together on Le Batard's show, and what I've heard other people carry champion ex-ESPNers have lent voice to that culture and how, as Dexter mentioned, they
ex-ESPNers of color. I just want to also add that, Brian.
Yes,
that matters. There,
that's an important thing.
Yes,
absolutely, that's an important thing because so this is how the revolution sort of started. The revolution of a lot of people just leaving ESPN and deciding under the Jimmy Pitaro era that we're not doing this anymore in that way, right? And with Rachel Nichols in particular, she felt very territorial about keeping something that she felt like she was entitled for. And while I do understand that part of it, the problem that bugged you, me, and a lot of people was basically alluding to her thinking that Maria Taylor is a diversity hire, which, is not the case. Maria Taylor is actually very good at her job. And the most interesting thing, or not the most interesting, one of the most interesting things that we're not talking enough about is that this is all happening during the NBA Finals, in which Rachel Nichols is no longer the sideline reporter for. Malika Andrews is, which that's an interesting move from ESPN. It's almost as if they were like, oh, let's find the other Black woman and put her on camera to sort of, ease ourselves away from this, because that's just a move that ESPN apparently tends to do. And then on top of that, you have Maria Taylor's contract is expiring during the NBA Finals. She has a lot of leverage right now. Not just because Jalen Rose said what he said on Countdown, where he sort of hinted at Maria. He didn't hint at it. He straight up said Maria Taylor's underpaid, and Maria Taylor, being a professional as she is, just try to move off of it and get into the commercial break or whatever. It was a really funny moment and a really funny segment that rings in an interesting and different way days later. And Maria Taylor has so much leverage in this situation now where I feel like, does she want to leave during the NBA finals and potentially like get X amount of money elsewhere, do her own thing? Does she want to stick up ESPN for another, 10 or 30 days or whatever it is and get more money to do it and then leave? Like, that's a fascinating element to this as well. The thing that I keep coming back to, though, is just the culture that ESPN has had and how they're just so ill equipped to really handle a lot of the things that they're trying to half-heartedly address. And one of it is being just the representation that they have, not on camera, but the people making the decisions, which is something we talked about a lot on this podcast. Is a lot of these companies, while they're starting to put more people that look like Dexter and I on camera, gradually the people who are the producers, the people who are actually in control of all this stuff, and recruiters and hiring people and really calling the shots at a lot of these places are not people of color. And in a lot of cases are not allies. Another element of this is very interesting is Rachel Nichols straight up saying in the clip that a lot of the people that she works for are Trump loving white conservatives, which is why it's been hard for her and I would imagine others to advance in the company. And Dexter talked about this earlier too, where Rachel Nichols said that she's felt, some of the imbalance, if you will, from being on the women's side of things. I will add, though, Maria Taylor, being a black woman, has felt the heat just that much more because that's how these companies sort of operate. Like at the end of the day, there's a lot of different layers here that we can sort of discuss. I also think that just ESPN is just demonstrating to be sort of ill-equipped at this.
People who listen or watch our podcast have known that Brian and I have spoken a lot about things in the workplace, things in sports media culture. We have spoken with guests here that are within the sports media industry about this, especially surrounding diversity,
At that company also?
At that company too. But I think the thing is, I don't want to hijack this because Jamel Hill said this and she knows better than anybody, but she said on Dan Le Batard's show, which Brian mentioned before, she talked about how people will look at the worldwide leader and look and be like, man, they are really good. They got this diversity thing pretty good. You see black and brown faces. That is true. But what matters is about how you treat people when you're in there. Trust me, people, I know on this too. You can work for companies that look like they're hiring black and brown people, but the culture's shitty. They're awful, right? Like we will get more into this very specifically on another podcast about this. Trust me, I'm telling you. There's stories. I got stories to tell. Word to Biggie about this. I know this. I've lived this. I've seen this as somebody who's reported on air in cultures that don't necessarily care about people in that. And when minorities are seeing this, they're very quick to go away. Brian, you brought up a great point that shouldn't be lost, that Rachel Nichols did speak about the culture and the white men around her being in that conservative or Trump-ish category about that. She spoke on that and how that was a problem. And I don't doubt anything she was saying on that was inaccurate at all whatsoever. So when you look at things like this is something that's bothered me and something I want to speak about, specifically addressing black people and how black people feel about this as a black man. Speaking of this, and a black man who's worked in journalism, sports journalism. When you look at everything that's happened with this and what should be part of the story too, which Brian's saying is very layered, and I do agree, is that you had a black woman who became the fall person, who was one of the video producers, somebody that apparently showed Maria Taylor this, which I would have done if I was in a position. I want to make that very clear. I would have done the same thing. Mm-hmm. You know what? And black people, I think people of all minorities would have felt like they had to do it because we know how things are in this culture when people are saying stuff about us and talking about us, so don't think that we get the opportunities. So we're going to look out for our homies and be like, yo, you see what this person's saying? I would have done the same thing. Now, you can get into the judgment of whether morally it's right or wrong, invasion of privacy. And I think people who are jumping to that conclusion are giving a pass for what's being said, and I'm not with that. However, right, it's about, well, the company hasn't taken any action we've seen thus far against Rachel Nichols. Now, there's an argument that can be made she was removed from sideline reporting for the finals, and that was her quote unquote punishment. Okay, maybe.
But you know what though?
Yeah,
That's not really anything. Like, okay, so they like, for example, here's how they've done it so far, right? They put Malika Andrews in. It's like, oh, let's get the other black girl, let's try to fix this or whatever.
yeah,
And that's not really fixing it, as we said, because all these problems are systemic, which is what we've been talking about really as a country for the last however long. And then they do the jump. She kind of
yes. I'm
talks
I'm
about
I'm
it,
I'm glad you bring this up. Yes,
kind of talks about it, and tosses it to Kendrick Perkins and Richard Jefferson. And it's like, the problem is that, really, and look, Rachel Nichols, yes, should address it, but the company shouldn't be putting all of them in that position to be the first thing that we hear coming out of this. Like, we should actually get something before that from a company standpoint, even if it's Jimmy Pitaro coming out and saying something, who's like the head of all the shit
I
going on
agree.
over there. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think even Rachel Nichols should be put in that position before the company should, because I think the company has to speak for some of the things that she said in that audio that's really damning your company and your culture and all those things that we've already talked about. And then to put Kendrick Perkins and Richard Jefferson in a tough spot, and a lot of people were clowning them, because they were basically caping for her, and a lot of people had the jokes that they were, Superman trying to hold up the white chick and all this shit. And I think that, look, they're put in a tough spot because they do want to keep their jobs, evidently. And it's like, I don't know what I would tell them to say in that situation, because I don't think they should have been there to begin
I
with.
agree. There was one option. There were two options, like you said. Well, I think both things could have happened. Company should have came out and said something on it. I agree with you on that completely. Or you let Rachel make that statement. That's it. What they did was they had Rachel make her statement or whatever, and then it was like, oh, you know what? We got two black guys here too. Let's
Yeah.
hear let's see what they have to say. And it's like, nah, man, like that's not
And then they
cool.
canceled the jump for the next day, like the day after.
Right.
There
Like
was no
that's
jump, which didn't make sense to me. And I'm like, so clearly leadership doesn't really know, like, there's no
You know
plan
why?
here.
You know why? Because they didn't got any people of color to come in there and check them and be like,
Right.
yo,
And
you know what? That's
that's
not the
really the
move.
I think
That's the problem. I agree.
that's the most important thing in all of this.
I
We
agree.
talked about this
That's
extensively on Sunday. We
I
talk
agree.
all the shit. Like, as I sit and think about this more now, I think this is what I keep coming back to, is like, from the top down, at virtually all of these companies, many of which, not many of which, but plenty of which Dex and I have worked at, right? It's a lot of the same stuff, and a lot of them don't seem to handle these things well. And the real issue is that they have these problems to begin with, because you never hear about this come from certain places.
Right. No,
But you hear about this routinely, especially the last few years, in the post John Skipper era of ESPN. Jamel Hill, Kerry Champion, Dan Levitard, Amin El Hassan, and others have spoken out about this, and others who leave will do so as well, I would imagine. So,
I think the problem is what they keep showing is that they don't care to. They think they can just sweep the bad press under the rug and not address what Brian is saying, the systemic cultural issues within the workplace. This is a part, these comments, to even make the comments or what even came out of Rachel Nichols' mouth, whether her intent was there or not, it's all part of the larger problem, systemic racism that trickles down, right? And people feel like they're losing something. So
yep.
when I even heard this, I wasn't even shocked. Like, I'm never shocked that when white folks feel like they're losing something, that they then say, oh, yo, these black and brown people are possibly taking this from me. I'm never shocked that that's the insinuation
And
as a black man in America.
the insinuation is that the people of color are less qualified.
Qualified. Yeah, never shocked about this. This is part for the course. Not like now, being a minority in America, we know this. But here's what I find interesting in what you said, Brian, about whether they decide to do a punishment or no punishment, or if what they tried as a punishment, canceling the jump the day after they had her come on and all that stuff. We know when ESPN wants to come down on employees for certain things, they will. A lot is telling to me. Does anybody remember? And I'm trying to make sure I get the time right on this as I'm looking at this. I believe this was July of last year, almost to the time we're recording this a year ago. Does anybody remember when ESPN suspended Woj for that profane email he sent to Senator Josh Hawley? who made the comment about how Adam Silver shouldn't have allowed messages of social justice on the jersey, and pretty much Agent Wojnarowski was like, "Fuck you," right? This was his email response to the dude, right? This right-wing senator, he was like, "Nah, I'm not here for that." What did ESPN do? They suspended Woj for 2 weeks, right?
Which on this podcast I killed them for. I was not happy that Woj got suspended for that.
Woj got suspended for 2 weeks. You could say there are black people, particularly black, specific, not just only black people, but specifically black people that are annoyed about the situation and what Rachel Nichols said and how this has all been handled, blah, blah, blah. All that's happened. No suspension, no action from ESPN. And what this says to me, and I was having this conversation with a few other people who are black about this, is ESPN kind of knows they don't have to suspend her because in their eyes, it doesn't matter. And what they're kind of saying is they don't think enough black people who watch ESPN or The Jump or whatever are going to stop watching. But you know what they do think? They do think the people on the right that don't necessarily care about people like us for the most part, they'll stop watching. And so they got to appease that because that's a large amount of their viewership. And they have to appease that. That's why Woj got suspended and nothing happens in this case. And my message in this to black and brown folks is like, yo, you got to wake up when you see stuff like this. Like, maybe this is the time to take a stance. But I'm only going to speak for my people. I've seen before when things have happened that hasn't gone well. We can look directly at Colin Kaepernick. How many people that look like me said, hey, you know what? I ain't going to watch the NFL no more. How many of y'all did that? Maybe it's the time you got to show where your dollars are, you put your money where your mouth is. And I think at times when the companies don't take action, they know that we're not going to do that because we haven't been doing that in recent history. All right. We haven't been doing that in recent history. And they know that. And that's why you don't see any action. So with that being said, when I see things like National Association of Black Journalists, and I'm a member of the New York chapter, is going to have a meeting, it's like, all right, and demand what? Like, what we've done these meetings before when we see this racist stuff happen at different TV stations or people, they're not hiring black folks for no opportunities. What's changing? It's the same thing that we said last summer, Brian and I said on here. We wasn't excited about people doing their Blackout Tuesday and all these companies posting these messages of, you know, unity and all this other stuff, and then they didn't do anything. Or in the case of the company I used to work for, I had to be the one to sit there and say, hey, y'all need to put a message out. And I'll get into more of that. And they didn't want to do that. Clown show. That's what it is. So when are we as minorities, and I'm particularly speaking of black people, but all our minority brothers and sisters in here too are going to be like, yo, this is enough. We're not supporting this anymore. That's when the real change happened. I'm not asking for people to lose their jobs. That's not what Brian and I are talking about. What Brian and I are talking about is like, damn, can y'all show y'all want to do the work to actually be better? And so far, the white folks in this company, whether it's ESPN or whatever companies you may work for, and this does not just apply to sports broadcasting, they have not shown that they are willing to do the work. That's the problem, right? And they haven't been forced to be shown the willing to do the work because they still getting paid, still getting that bag. Those dollars are still rolling in. Until they stop seeing the dollars rolling in and they're hurting that way, they're going to continue to do this because they have no incentive not to do so. This will blow over. Something else will happen. On to the next thing in the news cycle. And I'm afraid that's what's probably going to happen here.